Hi, my name's Glenn Weinreb, and today we're going to talk about how to decarbonize the making of materials and chemicals. And this is part 10 of our Climate Solution video series. We currently burn fossil fuel to make materials such as metals, plastics, and cement, and to make chemicals such as detergent and fertilizer. Making things often requires heat. And heat is typically created by burning coal or by burning natural gas. Unfortunately, the exhaust contains carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas. If one wants to make heat without emitting carbon dioxide, they have several options. One is to make green electricity and then use that to make heat. Another is to get heat directly from a nuclear reactor. And a third option is to burn fossil fuel, capture the carbon dioxide, and store it underground. This is called carbon capture and sequestration. When one switches from fossil fuel to green energy, they typically incur an additional cost. And this is often represented in units of dollars needed to reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 1 ton of carbon dioxide. When decarbonizing electrical power generation, decarbonization cost is typically $10 to $50 per ton. And when decarbonizing heat production, decarbonization cost is typically $80 to $140 per ton. In other words, it's easier to decarbonize electrical power generation than to decarbonize the making of materials and chemicals. As mentioned in previous videos, decarbonization does not move forward without government intervention. And many lawmakers ask, why spend $200 to reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 1 ton of carbon dioxide when we can do it for 20? This suggests large-scale decarbonization is likely to occur in lowest cost order. In other words, the decarbonization of electrical power is likely to occur before the decarbonization of materials and chemicals. This is okay since sequence is not important. All that matters is that carbon dioxide emissions decrease over time at a reasonable pace. Industrial processing facilities and factories use heat to make things. Now let's imagine a factory owner likes to hike with his family on the weekends. If we criticize his life choices, perhaps while hiking, he might point out 2 facts. One is that the electricity that enters his factory is not green. And the other is that the pipe under the street outside his factory does not carry green hydrogen gas. And his wife might point out correctly that if we are concerned about climate, we should not blame the factory. In other words, material and chemical decarbonization primarily involves the power company that supplies electricity, the utility company that supplies gas, and new laws that require decarbonization. The wife is right. Decarbonization is only implemented by a tiny portion of our society. Everyone else can relax. Now let's review decarbonization economics. The difference in the cost of a green product, which does not emit carbon dioxide, and its carbon-based equivalent is referred to as the green premium. For example, if a carbon-based product costs $8 and its green equivalent costs $10, the green premium is $2. If a consumer has a choice between buying a product that emits carbon dioxide and one that doesn't, they typically ignore the carbon dioxide and select the lower cost option. In other words, most consumers will not pay a green premium unless forced to do so. This is observed behavior and is consistent with economic theory. Consumers have a good reason to avoid green premiums. If a consumer emits 1/billionth of the world's carbon dioxide, then it's everybody else's carbon dioxide that will do them harm, not their own 1 billion. Therefore, they want everybody else to reduce carbon dioxide. Their own carbon dioxide is irrelevant. Economists refer to this as a prisoner's dilemma problem. Ultimately, transitioning to a green economy does not occur unless government intervention pushes it forward. There are 3 ways government can do this. These are taxes, subsidies, and requirements. We will now review each of these one at a time. Carbon taxes are not the best way to tackle climate change. This is because most companies who pay a carbon tax will not reduce carbon dioxide and instead will pass the additional cost of the tax onto their customers. Requirements, on the other hand, do not have this problem. With requirements, the only additional cost to consumers is the additional cost of the green product. Economists refer to this as efficiency. Taxes have an efficiency problem, whereas requirements do not. More specifically, requirements are 100% efficient. Subsidies are also not the best way to tackle climate change. This is because they do not control the rate of decarbonization. This is due to fuel price fluctuations that change the green premium and therefore change the incentive to buy green. In other words, subsidies do not control the rate of decarbonization. Requirements, on the other hand, do not have this problem. For example, if the power company is required to reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 1/12 each year over 12 years, that is what you will get independent of fuel price fluctuations. However, requirements do have one problem. They need someone to require. In other words, someone needs to receive instructions from government. With electrical power generation, you have the power company. However, with other areas of the economy, such as the production of materials and chemicals, you do not have the equivalent of the power company. However, this could be set up. And then one could decarbonize materials and chemicals with 100% economic efficiency and 100% control. Each manufactured item has a carbon intensity, which is the number of grams of carbon dioxide that is emitted into the atmosphere for each item made. Items include electricity, materials such as copper, and chemicals such as ammonia. For example, manufacturers typically emit 4 grams of carbon dioxide for each gram of copper that is produced, and electrical power plants typically emit 400 grams of carbon dioxide for each kilowatt hour of electricity that is produced with natural gas. When a nation decarbonizes, average carbon intensities decrease. The power company aggregates electricity from solar farms, wind farms, natural gas-based power plants, etc. And then they distribute it to customers via the grid. Each source has a carbon intensity, which again is the amount of carbon dioxide emitted into atmosphere for each unit of electricity that is produced. Customers receive a blend with a carbon intensity that is the average of the sources. If government requires the power company to decrease average carbon intensity, they would buy less from high-intensity sources, such as coal, and buy more from low-intensity sources, such as solar farms. Builders of solar farms and wind farms would then compete with each other and drive down costs. This is an example of lowest cost decarbonization at large scales with 100% economic efficiency. In theory, one could do the same with materials and chemicals using master distributors that aggregate products from multiple suppliers. The resulting output would have a carbon intensity that is the average of the sources, and government could require this to decrease over time to decrease demand for higher carbon intensity sources and increase demand for lower carbon intensity sources. Master distributors such as these do not exist. However, they could be established. Products made without emitting carbon dioxide are sometimes referred to as green. And it is easier to claim a product is green than to actually make a green product. In other words, in the middle of the night, entrepreneurs move non-green products to green warehouses to make money. And ships appear with mislabeled products. Economists refer to this as the shuffle problem. The only way to resolve this would be an international system that tracks the life cycle of materials and chemicals. This includes production, transportation, storage, and consumption. An international tracking system like this does not exist. However, this could be set up as well. In order for tracking to work, it would need to be overseen by government, and new laws would need to make tampering illegal. Otherwise, people would lie to make money, and honest competitors would finish last. Master tracking distributors might be defined as corporations that receive tracked products and sell tracked products with an average carbon intensity of sources. Initially, their use would not be required by government. In other words, manufacturers would not be required to sell to tracking distributors, and downstream consumers would not be required to buy from them. Later, when and if government wanted to decarbonize materials and chemicals, they would need to require 4 things. 1. Manufacturers must sell to tracking distributors. 2. Downstream consumers must buy from them. 3. Average carbon intensity of sold product would need to decrease over time. And 4. If the distributor receives an untracked product, they would need to assume the highest carbon intensity, which is that associated with burning coal. Master distributors is not a new concept. We have these with electrical power generation. And government requirements are already pushing on power companies to decarbonize the grid. However, they are pushing very little relative to what is needed. As mentioned previously, electrical power costs less to decarbonize than materials and chemicals, and political support for higher cost decarbonization is often lacking. Therefore, decarbonization is likely to occur in 2 phases. During phase 1, tracking systems for materials and chemicals are developed, tracking distributors are set up, yet not required, electrical power is decarbonized, and there's more R&D. And during phase 2 decarbonization, materials and chemicals are required to pass through master tracking distributors, and average carbon intensity is required to decrease over time. In summary, a government can reduce emissions approximately 3 to 1 over 20 years by placing requirements on aggregators of electricity, materials, and chemicals. Political support for setting up tracking systems and non-required distributors would be easy to obtain, since it would not affect the price of goods and services and would not threaten existing companies. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for phase 2. It would slightly reduce manufacturers' ability to compete internationally, and it would cause some companies to downsize. For example, farmers that are required to buy expensive green fertilizer would be less competitive against foreign farmers who buy cheap non-green fertilizer. Ultimately, phase 2 would only occur if 1. Climate concerns outweighed international competition concerns, and 2. Lower cost ways of reducing carbon dioxide had already been exhausted. Setting up tracking systems and distributors is the easy part. The hard part is creating heat without emitting carbon dioxide. This is sometimes referred to as green heat, and sources include electricity from renewables, hydrogen gas made by heat from a nuclear reactor, and heat piped directly from a nuclear reactor. Heat direct from a nuclear reactor in China is likely to cost 3 times less than heat from a solar farm or a wind farm. Therefore, nations who are not receptive to nuclear power are less likely to be competitive in a green new world. For this reason, the United States and Europe need to do more R&D to develop low-cost sources of green heat. For more information on this, see chapters 21 through 23 in this free climate book. If tracking distributors were required to reduce the average carbon intensity of their sold product, the demand for green heat would increase. And this would cause manufacturers of chemicals and materials to sign agreements to buy green energy at a later date at a cost higher than non-green energy. These agreements would then enable builders of solar farms and wind farms to borrow money since they indicate an ability to repay the loan. In summary, if government required decarbonization, capitalism would do the rest. As mentioned previously, decarbonization entails decreasing carbon dioxide emissions to zero over several decades, an example of which is shown here. Also, as mentioned previously, decarbonization cost is likely to increase over time due to political constraints. For example, less than $50 per ton might be tackled during the first decade, $50 to $100 per ton during the second, and more than $100 during the third. Roughly 1/3 of carbon dioxide emissions come from electrical power generation, 1/3 from the making of materials and chemicals, and 1/3 from transportation. If we graph decarbonization per year, we can expect to see electrical power first, followed by materials and chemicals, followed by transportation. Transportation is the most expensive due to several challenges that we will cover in future videos. During the early years of decarbonization, we can expect to see large-scale electrical power decarbonization and more R&D. One might be inclined to tackle other areas sooner. However, as mentioned previously, political support for large-scale decarbonization is low when decarbonization cost is high. It does not matter where within our economy we reduce carbon dioxide. All that matters is that we reduce approximately 1/30th each year over multiple decades. And if we do this in lowest cost order, the early years would be easy both politically and economically. For more climate solution videos, visit the link shown here. Thank you for listening.